Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 24th episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. In this episode, Kriket's going to be discussing past lives. We don't get into any specifics about how to do past life work, but if you do have any questions, we encourage you to reach out. We would be happy to share more. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and without further ado, here's Kriket.
Past lives is the subject of our discussion today, and I would like to start off with exploring some of the aspects of shamanism and relationship to past lives. I think that it is important to remember that our ancestors always had a relationship with spirit. I'm not suggesting that every single tradition that you will run into has a belief structure which includes past lives. I am, however, saying that there are many traditions that do accept past lives as a part of their experience. We have the structure or the belief in many of our traditions of the circle of life or the cycle of life. And there are some anthropologists and archaeologists who believe that we started to bury our dead because we started to recognize that that which goes into the earth becomes gestated and becomes reborn like a seed. Whether or not that started the whole idea, certain if you were super curious regarding the onset of the consciousness of past lives, you could do yourself a very fantastic and fabulous search and be able to find some good information. When I started the path of shamanism, it wasn't until maybe 4 years into my path, maybe a little longer, I'm not sure, that we discovered or started to talk about past lives. And I was introduced to what would happen to the soul once we died by doing a particular journey. I won't describe how the journey is done, not because I don't trust the people who are listening, but because I can't exactly control whether or not you will do this particular journey and come back. That it was a mind-bending experience, and if you are in class with me or if you work with me one-on-one and you ask me to help you with this particular journey, you know I'm going to say yes, or you can be almost rest assured I'm going to say yes. As I journeyed through the experience of how does it feel after I've died, I felt very liberated, and also I began to question different aspects of what it is that is traditional belief structures and what are non-traditional belief structures. So instead of talking about what are non-traditional or what are traditional, I want to really just talk about my own. My first memories are of dreams, and I dreamt very early on. I was probably the age of 3, certainly less than 5. And one of the dreams that I had, I remembered standing in a room that was surrounded me was men on cots, old-time cots. These men were groaning or quiet, and their skin looked like a cross between caramel pudding and soil. And it looked as though their skin was coming off of them, or there had been something very, very wrong done to their bodies. I do remember in the dream having the ability to smell, or perhaps as I aged, I included the smell. I'm not sure. I don't often remember scent in my dreams. However, The main thrust of this particular sharing with you is I remember asking this omniscient voice, why have you done this? And the omniscient voice replying to me, I haven't done this, you have done this. As the years have gone on, it has been anywhere between 45 and 47 years since I've had this particular dream. The details of the conversation have left me, except for that one particular line. What I do know is that throughout my life, as I did recall earlier, many of the aspects of the dream, it was a huge philosophical question and answer, and it left me wondering at the very young age how such thing age, how I had a dream with a voice that seemed larger than anything. I left that dream and pondered many things, and I believe I was in my early 20s, and I was in a library, which, if you know me, is not really particularly surprising. I love my libraries. I was flipping through a large textbook, those kind that have Routledge Printing Company 1972, something along those lines. And they're big and they're heavy and they're loaded with black and white photographs. As I was looking through this particular book, I came across a photograph. The photograph was taken of men in a room on cots with skin that looked so very similar to what I remembered in my dream. My body's response was to feel as though the wind had been completely knocked out of me. I don't believe at that point in time in my life that I had really considered reincarnation or the ability to live from life to life. I grew up in a very small town, and it was overwhelmingly Orthodox, Catholic, Ukrainian. There weren't a lot of discussions regarding mysticism, philosophy, let alone reincarnation. The house that I grew up in was taught that there was only one life, one God, one chance, etc., etc. You know where I'm going with this. It really gave me pause to wonder, because I had seen in my dream at such a very young age was a truth and a reality. It was horrifying to me at that time to know that a young child, myself, had these memories, and based on these memories probably had a very challenging relationship to the higher powers. Or, if you put in plain language, the simple fact of the matter is, I saw a photograph that was so similar to what I had seen in my dream when I was below the age of 5, that everything I had thought about the world kind of flew into a bit of a frenzy. I recovered, of course, but it really did make things seem a little odd to me. It was shortly thereafter that I began my journey to explore what is reincarnation, what are other traditions, what are other beliefs. Another aspect of past lives creeping into my life was I had a sister who I was very close to. Her name was Cheryl. She had cystic fibrosis. If you are not familiar with cystic fibrosis, it is a disease whereby the lungs fill up with fluid. And over time, essentially, the person who has cystic fibrosis drowns by their own lungs. It is a horrifying disease to watch. And it is horrifying to watch somebody you love slowly and without you can't do anything, to slowly watch someone you love die so horribly, and someone I loved so very closely. I believe she was my first true and absolute love in my life. she sat with my mom. Oftentimes my sister couldn't sleep. She had to sleep in an oxygen tent. And my mother, being the ever busy insomniac, the person who is up lots of times. You have lots of kids and you have a busy day, and sometimes the only time you can get things done is late at night. My mother was baking bread, and my sister was sitting on the stairs that led from the upstairs into the kitchen. And she said to my mom, "Next time I come back, I'm not going to be sick." That was the only part of the conversation that my mom shared with me. And I think my mother told me, well, I don't know why my mother told me, she's dead, and I can't really question what her ideas or what her thoughts were at that particular point in time. But I do remember that she told me, and I believe she told me because I was the closest one to my sister, for one. And secondly, I believe she told me because I know that I frightened my mother, even at a very young age. My mother was uncomfortable with what I could see, what I could do, what I could feel. And perhaps she shared that with me because I was the only person in the home who actually would listen to her and would believe her. That was another drop in the bucket on the side of the weightiness of reincarnation. A third aspect for me with respect to past lives and reincarnation is that I have always had this uncanny feeling of horror and dread at the thought of being shot in the stomach or at the thought of dying from a stomach wound. So much so that one of my favorite actors, Tim Roth, is in a movie that is called Reservoir Dogs, and I'm not sure if any of my listeners watch Quentin Tarantino. However, I've never been able to sit through that entire movie because of the scene where Tim Roth is shot in the stomach and goes through a very, very long process of dying. And I have seen, if I see movies or television shows where people are shot in the stomach, it's very disturbing for me. What I would ever do if I was a police officer or a first responder or came across somebody who had been shot in the stomach, I really don't know. However, I feel that I have healed an aspect of this, and I'll tell you how. I had decided to do a shamanic journey to a past life and circumstances around why I wanted to do this. But I know that what drove me was the question of how do I change myself by changing my past life? And I thought that was a really good question. And even though the answer is incredibly simple, it's also incredibly complex. I wanted to find out what it would be like to do a past life journey. So I started in my anchor spot. And I know I've talked about my anchor spot a few times on the podcast, and we've talked about the necessity of having an anchor spot and so on and so forth. And I was in my anchor spot with my lovely ancestors and my helpers with the intention of seeing or going into a past life. So I saw the silver cord. Everybody knows the silver cord. I think Shirley MacLaine made it silver cord. Everybody knows the silver cord. I think Shirley MacLaine made it from her book, I think, Out on a Limb, made it a very famous to many of the people who didn't have an understanding of past life. And that silver cord is that which attaches you physically to this lifetime. And that cord is connected to whatever that cord is connected to. As I'm in my anchor spot, I turn and I look, and there is this silver cord or a silver rope. And it wasn't floating up into the air, it was parallel to the ground. And so, being the fox that I am, I thought, oh my God, it's a trail, I must start my trail. And also, when you're trying to find things and you get a gift as simple and as easy as a silver cord, it is upon you to accept that gift from Spirit and tally-ho, chop, chop, get on with it and take the gift that Spirit has given you in order to find out what it is that is beyond or on the other side of that. I began by putting my left hand on the silver cord and walking, and the next thing I know, I'm turned around backwards, and my right hand now is on the silver cord. Over onto the right side of what I can see is this large expanse of fields. So there is all this potential is on the right side. That's the way that I would metaphorically describe it now, that here is my potential in this world. And then on the left side of me was a clear brick wall. It would seem logical because the brick wall would be able to see through it. Unfortunately, I couldn't see through it. I could only walk backwards. And as I'm walking backwards, holding on to this silver rope with my right hand, I realize I'm kind of stumbling, not just because I can't see behind me, but because I seem to be tripping over something. And I realize it's my footsteps. I have to walk backwards and place my feet into my own footsteps. What a funky gift from Spirit. It's like, here, you want to take a journey into the past life, here you go. We're going to give you a silver cord. Not only going to give you a silver cord, we're going to let you walk backwards. And not only are we going to let you walk backwards, you have to follow your own footsteps. I think that was a really accurate way of going, oh, wait, look, I have to find my past life. I have to know where I'm going. And in order to know where I'm going, I have to walk in my own footsteps. As I move along in the journey, the silver cord becomes brighter and brighter until it is shiny and beautiful, much like, how can I put it, much like, shiny silver is. Got brighter and brighter and more vibrant and more vibrant. And at the end of that silver rope, it ends and I am turned around. The scene in front of me is from around the 1940s. I know instinctively that I'm in the UK. I'm fairly certain I'm in London. There is a passageway, there's a road above me where I can hear the odd car going by, and there is a tunnel, like a pedestrian tunnel. It's not very long, and it was wet, it was rain cold, and I saw a man and a woman in the underground pedway that is bricked off, arguing. And the next thing I know, I'm not observing the argument, rather I'm the woman with my back against the wall. And as I enter into my body is the exact same time that the man that I'm arguing with shoots me in the stomach and leaves me to die. As I explored this experience, this past life, when you explore past life, there's this certain sense of knowing, capital K knowing, that occurs for you. And as you know things, you begin to put the pieces of your life together. What I was able to piece together was that my husband and I had both been spies. And if I, during World War II, was as glamorous as the movies make it out to be, I assure you there was nothing glamorous about this particular life at all. It was a life of secrecy. It was a life of shame. It was a life of hiding. It was a life of half-truths. It was a life of fear. It was a life of never knowing what would happen. There wasn't a lot of really substantially positive aspects to this life that I could gather and garner to myself. What I found out in that all-knowing moment was that my husband had turned out to be a double spy, and I had no idea. I was shot because I believe that was his order to kill me. Well, I'm sure it was his order to kill me. I was entirely stunned and shocked by this experience, and it left me very wounded. So I died with a feeling of abandonment. I certainly died with a feeling of betrayal. I died with having lost a great love. My husband was a very huge love in my life. I lost knowing that I could never trust love. I gathered from this past life fear. I gathered from this past life shame. I gathered from this past life the need for secrecy. And following very shortly, 20 years later, I end up because I was a foster child, and I was eventually ended up in the home that adopted me. In that home, my greatest love, my sister, was taken from me, not in such a brutal manner as me being shot in the stomach. But I did learn not to trust love, because love was fleeting, as I knew that my sister, I always knew that my sister was love, because love was fleeting, as I knew that my sister, I always knew that my sister was going to die. There were many shameful moments in my childhood. We lived with lots of shame in our childhood. We certainly lived with tons of secrets. We certainly lived in constant fear and danger. Many of the aspects of that past life were manifested or brought to pass or recreated in the life that I had with my family and with my parents. As I came back from that past life, one thing I should mention that is really key to it was I stepped out of my body as I was dying, and one of the benefits of doing past life work is that I had the ability to rewind where it was. And what I was able to do was I was able to retrieve the soul piece of myself just prior to finding out that I was soon to die by the hands of someone that I trusted implicitly, loved endlessly, and all of the other aspects of that. As a result, I could no longer say I have the scars of abandonment, I have the scars of not trusting love, I have the scars, etc., etc., etc. Because I had done quite a bit of work regarding the experiences of my childhood, and now this huge piece of my soul and huge questioning aspects of who I was and why I perceived the world to be a dangerous place, I brought that home and I had an understanding. So how do we change ourselves by changing? For me was bit by bit. What I mean by that is the change in my life did not occur immediately. I felt better immediately. I felt more confident immediately. However, I had spent many years of my life being afraid, being ashamed, and all of those other things that we described. So I had to retrain myself bit by bit to overcome those initial responses or those autonomic responses. So I did learn to stand straighter. I did learn to breathe deeper. I did learn to open my heart. I did learn to love wholly and completely without anxiety. I did learn to love relationships even though I knew they were going to be short-lived. I did learn many aspects about myself, and I changed aspects of myself. Doing a past life journey is incredibly cathartic, but it can also be amazingly confusing because you come back with answers, you come back with knowledge, you come back with all sorts of things, but now you have to fit it into your life, or now you have to figure out, what am I going to do with this now? How do I fix this? Or now that this is fixed, what do I do now? And that's just such human nature in that regard. And there's so much potential to it. However, what I really want to stress in this past life work and this past life podcast is that we have the ability to travel back and forth in time. We have the ability to heal ourselves by gathering the soul pieces that we've left in past lives, gathering our willpower, gathering our energy, gathering our love, so that we come back into this lifetime, this space, this place more whole. What I also like to do after I have done past life work is I like to journey to my future self. My future self does not have to be me at the age of 90 or any other time in this lifetime. My future self could be 3 lifetimes forward. My question to my person or myself 3 lifetimes forward is, what do I do? What do I need to do in order to heal? What do I need to do in order to make this healing happen? So I ask my future to enact this healing. That has been really very helpful to me, because I can get messages from my future self that I never would have guessed as being helpful in this lifetime by any stretch of the imagination. So an example was learning how to breathe. That was one of the first things that my future self said to me, was to learn how to breathe. It wasn't until that time that I realized that most of my breath took place in the top third of my lungs, and that the bottom third of my lungs, despite how many years I played French horn, I had lost that ability to breathe fully and deeply. And I remember asking my future self, what does breathing have to do with anything? And now that I have taught and harped on people about breathing, I can honestly say that breathing is one of the most important parts of any type of healing work. I won't go into why breath is important here at this point in time, because it is something that each person will do on their own, will learn how to do breath work. But in learning how to do breath work, I learned how to sit within my own body. I learned how to take a deep breath and reduce my anxiety. I learned how to breathe from my belly button up into my nose, and from my nose down into my belly button, and could circulate energy. And by circulating energy, I can circulate emotions. And if I can circulate emotions, I can sit within those emotions. If I can sit within those emotions, then I can unpack those emotions, unpack those words, and attempt to understand how they fit into my life now. How do I heal them from my life now? And how do I move forward with this thing? So breath work is very important. One of the things I want to add with respect to our past lives, at times it can be really difficult to cope with the experiences we encounter when we journey with our ancestors, when we journey with ourselves. The imagery or the feelings involved may be disturbing, or just the knowledge of who you were, or what happened to you, or what you did. That can be very disturbing. If you find yourself troubled or unsettled by what seems to have happened in the past, I encourage people to remember they're living in the now and living in a positive way in the world you inhabit. And that's the main priority of being a human being. When I discovered myself dying under the bridge, as I mentioned earlier, I immediately stepped in and gathered my spiritual, emotional, and mental bits and pieces that had been shattered, and immediately stepped in and gathered my spiritual, emotional, and mental bits and pieces that had been shattered and returned home. I could open my heart that had been closed. I learned how to feel safe. I brought safety home. And safety is something I had to work on again in another thing, but we can talk about that another day. I did learn how to breathe deeper, and I have a better relationship with my lungs. I learned I could trust myself. Because when you love someone and you don't see the fatal gun coming, I certainly couldn't trust myself that this person I love I can actually trust. So how can I trust myself if I don't see this coming? So when I learned to trust myself, I changed my perception. I chose in that moment not to live so closely to fear of relationship and to move to the, relationships are of all kinds are of experience. My life got deeper, richer, and I really think more peaceful. So you must learn how and why and where you connect in this infinitely designed, closely intertwined life. How and why and with whom you're currently involved. We all have a personal psychic anatomy. And I love that, psychic anatomy. And that is our vehicle and our tool. This is the software that you have programmed, which means that only you can reprogram the things you don't like. It governs your life, but you govern it. It is also influenced by everything found within infinity. Forces both constructive and destructive. Again, how do those forces move through you will be the product. I recommend you recognize that you've changed something. And I encourage you to try to reground yourself in the present, to do things in the present, and constantly refer to the landmarks of the here and the now. So if you've had a disturbing experience, refer to the landmarks of the here and now, reminding you that you're present and you're not in the past. How can you use the journeys to continue to unwind and unpack the issues that are causing you such distress? The imagery or the feelings, the knowledge of who one was, healing past life wounds and uncovering past life facts can be explored further, deepening the healing. We do have the tools and we do have the ability. One aspect that I find really important is to always keep the faith. And remember, when we journey with humility, innocence, and grace. Having discovered what happened to me in a past life doesn't mean that everything is peachy keen and absolutely wonderful. But what it does mean is that I understand myself better than I did just a short while prior to that. I was able to make conscious decisions regarding relationships in my life. I didn't have to be the puppet, so to speak, or the tool, so to speak, of my autonomic responses. I could take control of what those autonomic responses were and how those autonomic responses affected me. We live unconsciously. Many of us live unconsciously when I'm at my desk doing my job, trying to get through whatever it is that I do for a living. But if I stand back and I remember who I am, then I remember to live consciously. Whether you do a past life journey or not is entirely up to you. However, what I would really recommend if you do is that you recognize and understand that by journeying into the past life, you have become consciously responsible for yourself in the here and the now. And as much as we would love to say, something just came over me and I have no idea, or I did this and I didn't mean to do that, or how did I make this relationship mistake yet again? We can no longer really have those because we are no longer those people who have the luxury of ignorance, because we don't have the luxury of ignorance anymore. We have the luxury of self-knowledge, and the luxury of self-knowledge, well, who knows what that means? But I know that the luxury of my self-knowledge has helped me to change things I thought were unchangeable, and it has taught me to be present in myself when I don't want to be present in myself. It has given me courage to recognize there are many things that I can change and many things I can be responsible for. It is easy to sit on the sidelines of your life and not get involved spiritually. It is harder to become engaged in your personal life and in your own life once you've discovered the sweetness of personal life and in your own life once you've discovered the sweetness of living your life fully. So without harping on further, if you would like more information on past life journeys, or you are living in the Edmonton area and would like to spend a day with the ancestors in ceremony to learn about past lives, please let me know. I will happily work together to put a ceremony with the ancestors together so that I can continue to teach this incredibly important work. I wish you a lovely day, a lovely evening, a lovely week, whatever it is for you. And until next time, I bid you a very fond farewell.
Thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of Shaman. Thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of Shaman's Way. If you've enjoyed this episode and think others may as well, please do leave us a rating and comment on iTunes or whichever other podcast app you're listening to us on. It really is the biggest help that you can give us in reaching others who may be interested in this material. And of course, the biggest thank you can give us is to share this with your friends who may also appreciate it. From myself and Kriket, we hope you have a wonderful solstice and enjoy the holidays however you may choose to celebrate them. And again,